Looks like we got everybody coming in for our Fair Isle class here on this Monday afternoon. Hope you're all joining us. Darren is going to be your teacher. He's there on screen. My name's Claire. I'm going to be hanging out in the comments and helping there. If you have any questions or comments during the class, you can put those in the chat box in Zoom and I will answer them directly or pass them on to Darren. I'll also put the handout in there in case you need to download that. If you are on a mobile device or a tablet, you might not be able to download from the chat. But in that case, hopefully we can put a link in there that you'll be able to access it online. And just a note that this class is being recorded, so you'll be able to watch the video back starting tomorrow at michaels.com/classes. And Darren's got his cute hat on there, so I think he's ready to go.
Okay. So today we are going to learn about how to do Fair Isle knitting. And Fair Isle knitting will give you the ability and the opportunity to create color work in a specific way, which you can, once you learn it, you can do really an unlimited number of patterns and designs in your work and in your designs. So it's a lot of fun. It's something really good. I need to turn on another light. So it's a really, really good thing to learn and to get comfortable with. So we're going to talk about that today. So this is a hat, and we're going to review the pattern on how to make this hat today. Some of the things you need to know about before you even start knitting, though, you do want to select yarn that has a nice, strong contrast between the colors. So you want to make sure, like this hat here that's red and white, the colors are contrasting, but also the level of saturation is a nice contrast. So this is another hat that I've been working. It's the same pattern with just different colors. But you can see all of the colors are, the level of saturation and the color are actually quite contrasting. So you do get a nice, sharp, crisp design. If the colors are too close together, then it'll look very muted and you might not even see your work. It might be very flat and you could be disappointed. So we're going to talk about that a little later as well. And I'm going to show you on a swatch how sometimes that might look really kind of disappointing. Like you might be kind of sad that you didn't get such a good contrast. It's traditionally done with wool, although you certainly don't have to use wool. The yarn that I'm using today is acrylic yarn. It's Pound of Love by Lion Brand, and it's available on lionbrand.com and on michaels.com. But any type of worsted weight yarn will be suitable for this pattern. You do want something that's kind of fuzzy though. You don't want to use a yarn that's really slippery or a yarn that's super smooth. So you do want it to be a little bit fuzzy so that the yarn kind of holds itself together a little bit with the strands that are next to it. Traditionally, it looks a little nicer. You can use whatever you want though and try it and see, that's what a swatch will be for. So you can try whatever you want on a swatch, see what you like, and then make your decision from there. So I also recommend that you read the entire pattern before you get started to make sure that you understand exactly what's going to be expected for you in the pattern, and to do a gauge swatch. Okay, so maybe we want to change the view to the view of my hands, and we're going to look at a gauge swatch. Okay. So this is a little gauge swatch that I started working up. And a couple of very important things about a gauge swatch. When you're knitting in the round, you have to knit your gauge swatch also in the round because the knits and the purls have a different tension. So if you're knitting flat, so you're knitting across on one side, and then you turn your work and you knit back, you're purling back, the purls are going to have a different tension than the knit stitches, and that's not going to give you an accurate gauge. So for a hat, for a small piece like a hat, sometimes stitch gauge isn't the most important thing because hats are stretchy, they're going to fit, a variety of different people, unless if the gauge is like really, really crazy off. But it is nice to get an accurate gauge, especially for a project like Fair Isle, where it's a little bit more work. You don't want it to be, all that work for nothing. Another thing that a gauge swatch will tell you, other than just if you're working at the right gauge, is do you even like this fabric that you're making? Maybe you don't even like this fabric. So here on the bottom, I worked the gray and the burgundy together. And it's actually kind of cool looking. It's actually kind of pretty, but you really don't see it very much. Like you're going to go to a lot of work to make this beautiful, Fair Isle design, and that's not really going to show up very much. So you might be disappointed in that. And then I changed to red and gray, the brighter red. And of course, now you can see it shows up much nicer. So that might be a decision you might want to decide, do I want to use a brighter color or, how do I want it to look? And then I changed to the light blue and the red. And you can see that's a very bright contrast. So that's going to give me the most striking contrast. Kind of looks white in the video, but it's actually a light blue. And so that's going to give you a really nice contrast. So then you can look at this and then you can decide, which colors are going to go best for the design that I want. And then you can make your decision from that. You kind of feel it and see if you like the way the fabric feels. But here's a little trick that I'm going to show you. So I'm doing a gauge swatch. You have to do your gauge swatch in the round so that you're only using knit stitches to make your stockinette stitch. But you really don't want to cast on like 80 stitches to do your gauge swatch, because if you're doing it on 16-inch needles, when you're using 16-inch needles, you have to be able to take those stitches all the way around. And that's going to be a lot of stitches. That's going to be a lot of work just for a gauge swatch. So one little trick around that is, cast on, a nice number of stitches on a double pointed needle. And then with your other double pointed needle, you're just going to knit flat with this. And so what I did was I knitted across here. And now I have my red and my blue. And instead of turning my work and working back, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this red and this blue yarn that I'm working with and string it across the back and then pick it up from the front right here. And now I'll be able to continue with my gauge swatch. It's going to give me an accurate gauge because I'm only doing knit stitches. So it's I'm not really knitting in the round, but it's simulating knitting in the round. So it's giving me the same gauge and tension as if I were knitting in the round. So do you understand how that works? Do you see how that works and why that's important? Any questions about that? No? Yeah, it's pretty straightforward, honestly. Especially once you start doing it, you'll see how straightforward it is. And this comes in very handy, especially if you're doing a bigger project like a big sweater. Like you really want to make sure that you're getting an accurate gauge when you're making a larger project like a sweater. You don't want it to be half finished and realize it's never going to fit anyone. So yeah, so working the right type of a gauge swatch is extremely, extremely important. That out of the way. And so once you've determined your gauge and once you've determined the size needle that you're going to use, you can go ahead and cast on and get started. So let's review the pattern. Let's look at our pattern quickly just to see what we're getting ourselves into. And we're gonna see what we need to get started. All right, so for this one, the yarn that we need is Heartland, which is made by Lion Brand. And you need just one ball for the main color and one ball for the contrasting color. So you need two colors that contrast nicely. A size US 7 16-inch circular and a size 8 US size 8 16-inch circular. You're going to need stitch markers and a darning needle. So you don't need a lot of tools for this, which makes it nice, and you don't have to buy a bunch of extra stuff. And then for this tam, I'm going to go over all the stitch explanations in class. So I'm going to skip down here to just what we're doing. With the smaller needles, we're going to we're going to cast on 80 stitches. So when you cast on with a smaller set of needles, that gives your ribbing a little bit extra tightness, so that it'll help to stay in place on your head. So we're going to cast on 80 stitches. This is written as if you were making it with 4 double pointed needles. So you can kind of disregard this little bit here. Excuse me. But we're using a 16-inch circular, so we're not going to have to worry with that. But you do want to place a marker for the beginning of the round, and you're going to join, being careful not to twist. And I'm going to demonstrate that right now. And then we're going to work knit 2, purl 2, rib for about 1.5 inches. So let me quickly demonstrate how to join without twisting it. And then I'll show you how to get going from there. So once you cast on, you want to make sure that all of your stitches are all facing the same direction. So you want to twist them, lay them all out nicely so that they're all facing the same direction and are not twisted. So what that looks like is you can see this edge right here, the edge where the stitch is, it kind of looks like this, like a little braided edge. So you want to make sure that's all on the inside. And what you don't want to see is something like this, where it kind of twists around. So you want to make sure it's all laying flat on the inside. Your working yarn should always be, when you're starting and you're joining, your working yarn should be on the right. And then you enter your stitch and you knit just like normal. You enter that stitch. And I'm going to do knit 2, purl 2, rib. So I'm going to knit 1, knit 2. And then remember, when you're working rib, you need to come to a full stop. Bring your work to the front. Bring that working yarn in between your needles so that you don't make any mistakes. And now you're going to work your purl stitches, 2 purls, full stop, reposition your yarn by taking it in between your needles so you don't get that accidental yarn over, and then 2 knits. Now it's a good idea now to stop right here just for a second and see if you actually joined your work or not. So you can see right here, it is actually joined. So I joined my work. So I did it correctly. So just for the sake of saving time, I'm not going to finish this, but you go all the way around working in pattern. And then once you get all the way around, you want to lay your work down and you want to double check and make sure that it's not twisted. Now, if it is twisted, you have one chance to fix it, because when you joined it, here it's only joined by 1 string, and that 1 string is still flexible and you can still twist it. So when you get back to the very beginning, if it's twisted, you can fix it right there. Excuse me. But if it's but that's the last chance you have to fix it. So you always double check right there. And then so once you're sure it's not twisted and you're proceeding to the next step, and you finish your rib, you're going to end up with it looking like this. So once you finish your ribbing, and I did a little extra ribbing. Whenever I make something, I always kind of like to put my own extra little twist on it. So you can do a little extra ribbing if you want, or do it exactly how the pattern's telling you. And then we want to refer back to the pattern and make sure we're doing the next step correctly as well. So after we do our ribbing for 1.5 inches, we're going to change to the larger needles as you work. And I'll show you how to do that. And then we're going to increase. We're still working with color A, so just the same color, We're going to knit one, and then we're going to K, F, and B, so knit one, K, F, and B all the way around, and we're going to increase until we get to 120 stitches. Now, it is very, very important that you make sure you are at 120 stitches at the end of this. Usually I don't like to worry too much about the exact stitch count because sometimes it doesn't really matter. But in this situation, it matters because we're going to be following a Faire Isle chart, and the stitches are all counted out, and they have to equal the exact number, or else our design will not match up. So it is very important. Okay, so to switch to the larger needle, all you do is you take larger needle in one hand, and then you take what you're working with. You're going to disregard that needle. And so just for one round, I'm going to be working with one needle that's too large and one needle that's smaller. So two sizes of needles. And then you just knit from the smaller needle right onto the larger needle. So it's very easy. So you don't really have to fuss with that, but you'll be doing it in pattern. So what we're supposed to be doing here is knitting one and knitting in the front and back of one. So, and again, just for the sake of saving time, I'm going to just do it with, I only have a double point. I didn't grab a larger circular needle, so I'm just going to do it with this one. So just pretend that I'm knitting onto a larger needle, okay? So the way we do that is we knit one, put a marker to mark the beginning, knit one stitch, and then knit front and back increases by one. And you enter the stitch, wrap the yarn, bring the stitch through, and then you swing around to the back and you're going to enter the stitch in the back loop, wrap the yarn, and bring it through. I'll show that a couple of times. So this one, we're just going to knit like normal. So knit, KF and B stands for knit in the front and the back. So we're going to enter the stitch like normal, wrap the yarn like normal, bring it back through. And then we're going to swing this to the back. And then you can see right there is the back of the loop. We're going to enter the stitch through the back of the loop, wrap the yarn, and bring it through. And that is a one stitch increase. Now, what it's going to look like is you're going to see, let's see if it shows up on the screen. You're going to have a little bump right here, and it's going to kind of look like a purl bump. And everyone looks at that and they think, oh, I must have done something wrong because it's created that little bump. But that's what happens. So if you see that little bump, just know that that means you've done it correctly. It's like a little tattletale that says something has happened there. So any questions about how to knit ribbing, how to cast on, how to do your knit front and back? This is pretty much a review, just getting us ready to start the Faire Isle. I just want to make sure everybody was caught up to speed. Any questions about that? Okay, doing all right with that? Now let's look at this chart. Because once we look at our pattern, it says the increase round, and that's what we just talked about. We're going to knit one, KF and B, and we're going to work all the way around until we get to 120 stitches. At the end of this round, you do want to count and make sure you're at 120. If you're not at 120, what I would recommend doing was just kind of make it into 120. So if you're like 119, you can just add an extra stitch along the way somewhere. If you're at 122, maybe knit two together to just kind of force it to be there. Like, I wouldn't want you to have to take that round completely out, but if you're at like 160 or something crazy, then you're out of luck. But you know, as long as you're pretty close, I always say just kind of force it to work. It won't make that big of a difference. So, but once you get to that point and you're sure you're at 120 stitches, what it's telling us is to begin the chart. Begin chart 1. And so this is what chart 1 looks like. And if you've never read a knitting chart or followed a knitting chart, it does look kind of intimidating and kind of unusual. This is another version. This one is it's a different design, and it has colors because it's working with more than just 2 colors. So, depending on your chart, or if you have a colored printer, if you do have a chart that has more than 2 colors in it, I highly recommend getting a colored printer and printing it out in color, because it's going to be hard to keep track of. So, but this one right here is the one we're going to follow. Now, a chart, if you've taken the cables class, or if you ever have done lace, all charts are pretty much read the same. And the first thing I recommend doing is getting rid of all the other information that you don't need. So just kind of fold everything back so that you don't have to look at the other things that are going to be confusing you. So this is all we're doing, is we're just following this chart right here. So let's kind of zoom in on that. That's what we want to focus our attention on. It gives us numbers. So it's 1, 3, 5, and 7. It doesn't list the even numbers, but it just assumes that that there are even numbers that should be there. So let's look at row 1. And so row 1 is just one solid color. So you're going to make a decision. My hat was red and white, so I'm going to make the white squares my white yarn, and the gray squares will equal my red yarn. So you make the decision, and it will make the hat look very distinct depending on which decision if you make a second hat and reverse that, the hat could look quite different. So it's a nice way to do it. So the first one, it's very easy. I'm just going to knit like normal. I'm just going to knit all white. Now the second row is, in my situation, it's red, white, red, white. Now that's pretty easy. I'm just doing red, white, so that doesn't have to be intimidating. Row 3 is just all white, and row 4 is all red. Row 5 is white, red, white, red. So you can see, if you look at it line by line, it's actually quite simple and quite easy to follow. And here's another little trick that I like to use. I like to use a Post-it note. We all have Post-it notes handy. So you can put a Post-it note under the line that you're doing, and then it's easy to just move it up as you go. And then if you have a hard time keeping your eye right in the right place, sometimes it's easy to look up and get off track. Another thing you can do is you can use 2 Post-it notes and block out everything except just for the line that you're looking at. So that way, there's really no chance of getting confused. You're going to look down, you're going to see white, red, and then you're going to know that that's right where you are. There's no questions. All right. So that's a few little tricks on how to follow a chart, how to make it a little easier. Another thing about a chart is you need to know how many stitches you're working with. So this has 4 stitches, and this one tells us it's a 4-stitch repeat. That means we're going to be repeating the same 4 stitches over and over and over again. And so that's why it's very important that we have 120 stitches, because it has to be divisible by the number 4. So if you wanted to change the design of this hat for whatever reason, and you don't want to use 120 stitches, let's say you want it to be a much smaller hat, you could do maybe 80 stitches. 80 stitches is still divisible by 4, so your chart is still going to work, but then the hat is going to be quite a bit smaller. You couldn't say like do 76 stitches, because it's not going to work. You're going to have like random stitches, and it's just not going to line up right. So understanding what that 4-stitch repeat means and how that applies to your work can be very important, especially if you're going to try to change the design. And sometimes it's fun to change the design. Maybe you want it for a different, maybe like this beret is great for for you, but maybe you have a friend that won't wear a beret and they would rather have a more traditional, beanie style hat. So you could alter it to make it into that. All right. Any questions about this chart, how a chart is set up or how we read a chart? We always start at the bottom on the right-hand side and we read it. When we're working in rounds, I do want to bring this up. When you're working in a round, you always read the chart from this side because what's happening, you're going across, you're working around, and when you come back to the next round, you're coming from this side because it's like a spiral. If you were making a scarf, however, you would do it zigzaggy, but we're not making a scarf. We're not working on something flat. So you would always, and that's why all of the numbers are on this side. If it were a different situation, then if there were a number 2 over here, then that would indicate that you would be working it from opposite sides. But for a chart in the round, you always read the chart from the right-hand side. Any questions about any of this? It's a lot of information, but once you start working with it, it'll all make sense. We doing okay? Okay. All right. So now now that we've talked a lot about things, let's see how it actually works in real life. Okay. So I'm going to use this orange that I have, little sample. Okay. So let's pretend I've already did my round of all white because you don't want to watch me knit a round of all white. So the first thing I have to do, so it's let's say it's orange, white, orange, white. So the first thing I have to do is attach this orange yarn to my work. And people love to turn this into a crisis. They love to make this into some kind of a hard situation. You can watch YouTube videos giving you all kinds of crazy ideas on how to attach a new color. And you can enjoy that. That's fun. It's a fun activity. But I'm going to show you something. You don't have to do anything. That's my favorite number of things to do is 0. So let's see what we can do. I'm going to just enter my stitch, wrap my yarn, bring it through. Look what happened. I added a new color. I joined a new ball of yarn and I didn't do anything, nothing special. So when you try to go back and remember, what was that thing he did to add that new color? Remember, there was nothing. Nothing happened. You just pick it up and start. Let me show you again. You probably missed it because it was so easy. I love easy things. Easy is my favorite. All right. So you can see it's not joined. You enter the stitch, wrap your yarn, bring it through, transfer it over. What does that sound like? That sounds exactly like a knit stitch, right? And that's all it is. And then after we're finished, we'll just weave this end in like normal. And then your task is over. So it's easy. It's so easy. So we're going to do orange, white, orange, white. And I split my yarn there, but I'm going to leave it for now since we're just practicing. It doesn't really make much difference. Now here's an idea that you can do or don't. You can make your decision. I like to put a stitch marker every time I finish a repeat. So I have orange, white, stitch marker. So I'm going to do it again. Orange, white, orange, orange, stitch marker. Okay, wait a minute. What happened? My stitched repeat didn't work out right. I'm supposed to be orange, white. This one looks fine. So it must have just been one little mistake I did right there, right? So that's why I like to do a stitch marker every repeat, because if I do make a mistake, I can check, it was easy to find there because this is such a simple little pattern, but sometimes it's a little more complicated and you don't want to have to go back 60 stitches trying to find that mistake. So if you go back through each one of your repeats and they're all right, then it's easy to find where the mistake was. So that's just a helpful hint, and you can choose to do that or not. That's up to you, but I really do, especially if it's a more complicated chart or if there's like 10, if like it's a 10 stitch repeat or something, I really like to use a stitch marker between each repeat. So orange, white.
While you're working on this easy section, Darren, we've got a couple questions that want to know how you're holding the yarn and how you're working with the two colors.
Perfect, because that's exactly what I was going to talk about next. There are several ways, different ways of holding the yarn, and I recommend, I'm going to show you 3 or 4 different ways, but there are even more depending on how you hold your yarn normally when you're just working regular. So when I knit on a regular basis, when I'm just knitting stockinette stitch or whatever, this is how I do it. I wrap my yarn with my left hand, and that's a little bit, it's not a traditional way. Most people don't do it this way. That's how I taught myself to knit, and so that's the way I'm happy. So when I do Fair Isle knitting, I like to wrap it with my left hand as well. And what I tend to do is just hold it like that, and then I can decide which color I'm using. So I kind of guide it between my fingers, and it also helps to keep it from getting quite as tangly. So that's how I do it. Now, if you knit continental, which I don't do, I know how, but I don't do it, you can hold it. So you can hold it more like this, and then you kind of scoop the color that you want. And if you're a continental knitter, then you'll be able to do this in a much more elegant and efficient way than I'm doing it. But that's basically the same principle, is you just kind of scoop, you hold the yarn till it's available for you, and then you scoop up whichever one you want to use. Okay, so you can also, and I know I'm getting off pattern now because I'm just demonstrating, I'm not really making anything. You can also hold it in each hand. Now, one thing I want to mention is, depending on if you're holding your yarn like this, and you can see how I'm holding it, where my orange yarn is on the top and the white yarn is on the bottom. You want to maintain that, however you've started it, whatever you've decided, because if you switch it mid-project, it's going to be visibly different. One, depending on the way you wrap, depending on how your tension is, one of them will become a little more dominant and the other one will kind of sink back a little bit. And it's not a real striking difference until you've switched mid-project, and then you'll be able to see it. So that might be a little experiment you want to do. You could do like different rows and switch them just to see, if you do like 5 rows and then 5 rows and then 5 rows, now it looks like a pattern. But that could be a little experiment for you, and you could see like, how does that actually affect it? But for the most part, you want to make a decision and maintain that decision throughout. So same with this. If you're going to hold one in one hand and one in the other hand, orange is in my right, white is in my left. That's how I should do it throughout the whole project, so that it maintains the same look. So I can do white and then orange, white, and then orange. And I know other people, when they knit with their right hand, they wrap their yarn differently, where they can do it much faster and they kind of flick it. But I don't do it that way, so I'm not going to even pretend I know how to. But however you get the yarn around the needle, that's fine. But you can, in this way, you can hold it in one hand and in the other hand. And what happens to me, though, I'll start out like this, and because I usually hold it in my left hand, by the time I get to the end of the round, both colors are magically back in my left hand. I don't know how it happened, and that's kind of what happens. So you can also hold both colors in your right hand, and then figure out how that's going to work best for you to do your wraps. So if you're a British knitter and you throw with your right hand, Now, however you throw that yarn around, then that'll be the same way you can do it with both, but you'll probably just kind of hold it between a finger like that and throw it. And again, that's not the way I really knit, so it's not going to look very pretty and very efficient. So, but I think if you practice, which with whatever method is the most comfortable for your hand, that will get you there. And here's another way. It's a little slower. You just wrap with one color, let it drop, wrap with the next color, and then let it drop. And that's a little slower, but you know, where are we going that we need to knit fast? You know, probably nowhere. So whatever's the most enjoyable for you. What do you think, Claire? Which way's best?
I would say exactly the same thing, whichever is most comfortable for you. And I tend to do it the slow way. So
Yeah, I don't really try to knit fast. So, but this way works best for me because this is how I hold my yarn naturally. So I just do it like that. Yeah, so just practice all the ways. There's lots of people that have very strong opinions, and you know, we thank them for their opinions and just then do what we want, right? We don't have to listen to people with bossy, strong opinions. Yeah, but that's holding your yarn. So while you're knitting though, some things that you really want to pay attention to are, they're called floats. And these, when you're not using yarn, like when I knitted the white one, so I'm not using the orange kind of carries and rides across the back and it's not being used. So it's either called a strand or a float. And that's just resting along the back nicely. Now for the floats, when you're doing like I'm doing, where you're doing just like one or two and then going on, it's not such a problem. But if you're knitting like 3 or 4 or 5 of white and then you're switching back to the orange, so let's go ahead and do that so we can see how that looks. Traditionally with Fair Isle, you wouldn't normally knit more than 5 stitches without switching colors. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because Fair Isle is a very specific technique that's developed on the Fair Islands of Scotland, Fair Isle of Scotland, and there are like rules and regulations which determine whether or not it's truly authentic or not. Some people say 5 stitches, some people say 3 stitches. I think 3 and 5 are good numbers to have. You don't want it to go too far. I'm going to let this one go really far just to show you what kind of a situation that will cause. Okay. So now let's look at our floats, and then I'll show you how to avoid it. Okay. So here you can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches. Then my float it's quite long. One thing that can happen if you're not careful is if you don't leave enough room for that float. I'm going to pull this, just pretend. I didn't leave enough room for that float. And what's going to happen is it's going to cause my fabric to pucker on the other side. And your hat will actually, or whatever you're making, will become very stiff. Knitted fabric is stretchy because the stitches are stretchy, but one strand of yarn is not stretchy. So if you've got some really, really tight floats in the back of your work, that's not going to stretch. So you're going to run into some problems. So you want to make sure that your floats are long enough. But if they're too long, see how that's really long? When you put on this hat, or if it's a sweater, you're going to get that caught on something and it's going to pull, and it'll pull all of your stitches really tight. And that's not going to look nice. And then if you don't do that, if that's not what happens, because there's so much slack, then these stitches will have room and they'll kind of grow. They'll kind of pull that slack, and then the stitches will tend to look really large compared to the other stitches. So you don't want too much slack and you don't want too little slack. And so what you do to kind of help prevent that, excuse me, it comes with practice. Get past the stitch marker, take those out. We don't need those, we're just practicing. So I have 1, 2, 3 white ones. So I enter my stitch like I'm going to do another white stitch. And then this is just how I do it. I just twist my yarn. So now what happens is that white and that orange are kind of twisted together. And now I can knit 3 more white stitches. And then if you twist them back the other way, kind of untwists them so you don't end up with a lot of twist. And because depending on the design you're making, you might have like 10 white stitches in a row without any orange ones. And I'll show you something where that can happen. So now I've got this nice big stretch of white where there are no orange stitches. If you look at the back, I don't have any of these great big loose floats because when I twisted it, I caught my floats here. So what that helps to do, it helps to keep the tension even. So I've got these nicely, the floats are laying nice and snug against the fabric. They're not tight and they're not too loose. And a situation where you might want to do that, and this technically isn't Fair Isle, this is a stranded knitted project. So for this deer, when you're making the body of the deer, I think there are like 20 stitches here. You have to go all the way across. So you would wrap, see how you can see where I caught my blue on the inside so that it doesn't create those huge floats. And it helps to keep the tension very nicely. So that's why you need to do that sometimes, depending on what type of design you're making. But it's really fun to make these. And this, again, is not hard to make. You're just following it line by line. And it's not, these things look very complicated, but I promise you, they're much easier to make than what you think before you start. By the time you make 1 or 2 of them, you'll just realize that and you'll be able to keep going. So any questions about which hand you should hold the yarn in, how to catch a long float, or why that's important? Any questions about anything we've talked about? Doing all right, Claire?
I think we are doing all right. Everyone liked your tip on the floats, and they especially liked your easy tip on joining yarn.
So easy. I love something that's so easy like that. I'm going to try to show a couple of quick things and then move on to the next part of the hat. So when you're knitting Fair Isle or any type of stranded knitting, what you don't want to happen is, I know when I'm like knitting like normal stockinette or something, I kind of let all of my stitches bunch up here in my hand for a while, and it doesn't really make any difference. But for this, you do want to knit like every 4 or 5 stitches, you kind of want to stretch them out on your needle, maybe give them a little pull down, and that kind of helps to even out your tension. And then kind of progress those on past that part of the needle a little bit. And then knit a couple of more. These are just tips to kind of help you not end up with really tight stitches. So just kind of move those along. Don't let them bunch up in your hand. Every now and then kind of give it a little, and that kind of helps to even out your tension a little bit. If you're having a lot of problems where no matter what you seem to do, your floats tend to become very tight, another trick is, and this sounds kind of silly, but if you turn your work inside out, so the outside of a circle is bigger than the inside of a circle. It's just kind of basic geometry, which I'm not good at geometry, but that much I know. So my work is inside out, but when I'm working on it, I'm still looking at the right side. So it's not like I'm looking at the wrong side. So I turn my work inside out. I'm still looking at the right side as I'm working it, but that kind of puts the floats on the outside where it's a little bit bigger of a circle on the outside, and that might give you just enough ease to where that might loosen them up enough. So if you knit it inside out and you're kind of giving it that little snug and you're making sure you stretch your stitches out, you shouldn't have any problems with tight floats, right? Claire, do you have any tricks or any ideas for that?
I was just going to say the inside out thing, because that's how I do all of mine.
I think you told me that. I think I learned that from you, actually.
Yeah. We did have a question. What do you do? Say you've done this round where you're using both colors and the next round is just one color. What happens to the other color?
Okay, so let's just pretend I finished the round. So if you're not using the color at all, then you just leave it behind and let it rest. You don't want to cut it because you really don't want like 1,000 ends to weave in. So all you do then is you just pick up the color you're using. Now what could happen at this point is now I'm just using white the whole way around, but you could be adding a new color. I could be doing white and blue. And then you would just add the blue just like I added the orange. Um, do whatever you're supposed to be doing with the white and the blue, and then you just let the orange rest in the back. You might not be using this orange for 2 or 3 more rounds, and then all you do when it's time to use it again is you just gently lift it up to where you wouldn't want to go like more than an inch, I wouldn't think. If it's longer than an inch, cut it and weave it in. But if it's just like a ½ inch or a 1/4 inch or 2 or 3 rounds, it's called a vertical float, and you just bring that up and start knitting with it. But also with the vertical float, you want to make sure that it's not too tight or too loose. But that's pretty easy to manage because you're just bringing it up, joining it, and it's just the one time. So that's pretty much, it's pretty simple when you do it. Again, sometimes these things sound more complicated when you're listening to them, but when you do them, that's why I encourage everyone to try it, because you're going to find it to be much more simple than you think. But that's a really good question. Yeah, you just kind of leave it behind and then pick it back up once it's needed. So any other questions?
And then connected to that, what about the jog when you are joining the rounds?
You know, in Fair Isle, I was told by a very smart instructor that with Fair Isle, you are just going to have to live with that jog, because if you start slipping stitches and moving stuff around, you're basically going to mess up your pattern, and then that's going to be just as bad as a jog. So what do you think, Claire? Do you have a secret magic trick?
Yeah, that's it. Because if you start, slipping the stitch, then your row count is off there, and your stitch pattern is going to be off. Um, Generally, there's enough going on that hopefully you won't really notice it. And of course, I'm a great believer in that will block right out.
You can kind of block it out a bit. You know, you can kind of pin things like up or down or smush them together a little bit in blocking, and sometimes that'll help. Um, you just put that to the back, right? And that's fine. Nobody will care. But yeah, usually they're busy enough that nobody really cares about that. You don't really see it. So, all right. So with this chart, so this chart's pretty straightforward. It's just going straight up. You're, just doing each line one at a time, moving your Post-it note as you go. Of course, we're always very happy when we get to one of these where it's a solid color, but you get to the top, finished with that chart. Now we're going to move to chart 2. Chart 2 is it looks a little crazy. All right, so what do we do with that? That seems a little bit crazy. We don't know what that means. We don't really know anything about that. So we're going to look at it. We're going to figure it out one at a time. So this time, it's a 20 stitch repeat. So we're going to repeat. We need to make sure that whatever our stitch count is divisible by 20. So 120, if we're accurate with that, then we are going to be able to go with that. So if you did alter the hat because you wanted it to be different when you started and you were using a number that was divisible by 4, now you have to make sure that number was also divisible by 20. So that's why it's important to read through the whole pattern before you start, especially if you're going to make any alterations. You want to make sure you know how those alterations are going to affect you progressing through the pattern. So I would recommend, especially here, it really is very important to go through and put a stitch marker marking out all of the stitches. Every time you have 20 stitches, mark it out. Because if you get to the end of that and something isn't working out right, you don't want to have to go back through the whole hat. You'll know that it was somewhere in that previous 20 stitches, and that's pretty easy to sort out. So again, I would use my Post-it notes to kind of keep track of where I am, and then just move them up as you go. Okay. So this one, Even though there are a lot of stitches, it's just as easy as the first chart we did. You're just going to, each one of these squares represents a stitch. And so each one of these colors represents the colors that you've chosen to use. So white, red, white, red, white, red, white, white, red, 3 white, and then you just progress all the way across. You do that all the way around. And when you get to round 2, um, everything should have balanced out. Now we're going to start with red, red, white, red, white. And as you're looking at it, as you're continuing with your work, make sure that it's actually stacking up on top of each other, kind of making this checkerboard. You can say red, white, red, white, red, white, but look at it as you're going and kind of double check to make sure it's doing that. You're eventually going to be kind of getting this diagonal line of white and this diagonal kind of shape of red. So as you're making it, make sure these shapes are kind of taking proper shape. What it's really going to look like then is this. Let's see. What we're actually working on is this type of a situation. But so this is the center. We're doing this half. That's our checkerboard. There's our diagonal lines. That's our center, our diagonal line, checkerboard. So that's what it's going to actually look like. So as you're, working with it, make sure that it's kind of shaping up in that way. And so it's pretty easy up until you get to here. Now here's where things start to kind of look really confusing. And it can be a little overwhelming. And when I first started knitting, even after I knew how to do it, whenever I would pick up a chart like this, it would always take me a few minutes to figure out what I was looking at. Like I know what this means, but why does it have to look like this? So remember, each stitch represents, or each square represents a stitch. So if there are no squares, there are no stitches. So here, this area that I'm coloring in, there are no stitches to work with there. So we're just going to skip that space and move to the next space, to the next square. So we're going to go across here. We're going to do white, red, white, red, white, white, red, red, white. And then we're going to do whatever this means. And then we're going to go on to here. And we're just going to pretend that this isn't even happening, right? So let me show you on this hat here. I've kind of been working on it, kind of getting it up to that point. I'm actually, let's move it up here. I'm on row 11. And so I wanted to show you, because it's a bit more dramatic up here, because I've got just these few stitches, these center stitches, which were all by themselves. And then way over here, I've got these stitches. And so we've got all this empty space. So I worked up to this point because it's a little bit more dramatic, and I wanted you to be able to see exactly what's happening here. And once you understand it and get your head wrapped around it a little bit, it's much, much easier than you're expecting it to be, okay? So let's look and see what I'm doing. I'm doing white, and I'm using kind of this brownish. So I'm doing white, brown, 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 white. So let's do that first. I already knit one white, so I got my white. So white, brown, brown, brown. So 3 browns. 1, 2, 3 browns. White. So I'm going to knit a white one. Okay. So now what I like to do, and what I've done here, and I know I told you to put stitch markers every 20 stitches to kind of mark your stitch repeat. But what I like to do then is to put a special stitch marker to mark this center, because something very special and very important is happening right here. And if you're anything like me, I'll start daydreaming and I'll be watching television. Maybe I've had a glass of wine. And it's easy sometimes to pass over something thinking you know what you're doing when you're really just not paying attention. So I've got these yellow stitch markers, which are marking my repeats. And then I have these round colored stitch markers, which indicate where this very special, very important thing is going to happen. So I'm going to slip my stitch marker. Now let's look at this. What is this telling us? Okay. So this special symbol here, we're going to go down here to our legend, and we see that symbol is repeated right there. And what that means is SK2P. That doesn't really tell us anything. What is SK? That's helpful? That's not helpful. Okay, let's keep reading. Slip one as if to knit. Okay, so slip one as if to knit. That makes sense. That's a language. Knit two together. We probably know how to do that. Pass the slip stitch over, and we've decreased by 2 stitches. So we've taken 3 stitches and turned them into 1. So that's actually quite simple. Let me show you how to do that exactly. So the first thing we're going to do is slip 1 stitch as if to knit. And what that means is, normally when you slip a stitch, you want to slip it as if to purl because you don't want to twist your stitch. But it's telling us, that's why it's telling us slip as if to knit, because this is a special situation. So we're going to enter the stitch as if you were going to knit it, but then you're just going to slip it. So you see how I just slipped it right over? I didn't do anything. Now knit 2 together, that's pretty easy overall. So we're going to enter both of these stitches. Let me move these papers because it's easier to see with the blue background. So enter both stitches, wrap my yarn, bring it through. Okay, so knit 2 together is pretty easy. And then we're going to pass the slip stitch over. So we're going to just grab that slipped stitch that we slipped. And this is kind of like a bind off almost. It leapfrogs right over that knit 2 together and drops off the end. And it's not going to unravel because it's looped around that stitch, so it's secure. So think of it as kind of like a little bind off. But what that does is, there were 3 stitches here, but now there's just 1. And also you can kind of see that past it, when we slip a stitch, pass it over, it kind of creates this bigger kind of stretched out stitch that's leaning this direction. And what that gives us, it gives us kind of this decorative edge, this decorative, it looks almost like a little cable. So it's not just a decrease, it's also a decorative feature. So it gives us a nice little bit of texture and a nice little decorative feature there for your project. Makes it just a little nicer. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do that again. Let's see if I can undo it without unraveling half of my work. Any questions about that, why I set up to do it again?
I was going to say, we've had such a good time. I didn't realize it's almost 5 o'clock.
I know.
Yes. I will put the handout in the chat one more time, as well as the link. And just a reminder that this class is being recorded. So if you want to go back and watch it again, you can do so starting tomorrow at michaels.com/classes or on the Michaels YouTube channel.
So I'm going to slip it as if to knit, knit 2 together, and then pass that slip stitch over. And it's, once you do it a couple of times, it's actually super easy. And you can look at the directions as you're doing it each time until you get the hang of it. But it's something that I feel like you'll be able to do really well. And then you just progress the same. So I was up here. I did my double decrease. And then you just skip this space, right? There's nothing happening here. So I'm just going to go to the next square that's giving me an instruction. And what that's telling me is I'm going to knit 1 stitch with white. So I'm going to do white, brown, brown, brown. So white, brown, brown, brown. And you can see what happened here. I finished my stitch repeat. I finished all my colors. I came to my stitch marker. So what that gives, now I feel confident and happy that I did everything correct, and I can slip that over and I can start my next stitch repeat with confidence, knowing that I've set myself up for success. Now, had I got here and instead of brown, if I did brown, 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 and say there was another stitch there that I had to use, something's wrong. So that way I would kind of go back and recount backwards through these stitches to make sure, where did I make that mistake? And so that's why I like that, because it's easy to make sure that everything is correct before you move to the next one. All right. Any questions about anything else? Oh, we are 1 minute over. I think we have covered everything though. The only thing I would like to tell you, once you get to the top of the hat, and you get to the point where you're closing it up and it's very small, you will have to switch to either double pointed needles to close up the top, or you could use magic loop if you choose to. And if you don't feel comfortable working with either of those, we have taught a class on knitting in the round, so you can go back and find that in michaels.com and watch how to use double pointed needles or magic loop. So are there any questions? I think we covered everything. I do also like to talk a little bit about the history of where like Fair Isle knitting came from, but we don't really have time. But it's actually very interesting. If you Google like the history of Fair Isle knitting, it comes from Scotland. It's actually, the history of things. Or I like the history of things, so it's actually kind of fun to know where it came from. So if you have any questions or you need any help at all, you can look for me on Instagram. My Instagram name is Mr. Woolly Bear, M-I-S-T-E-R, Woolly Bear, and I think Claire will put it in the chat. I'm also on TikTok. You can watch, I did some videos, I did a video today with Fair Isle just promoting the class, but I don't always see comments or direct messages on TikTok, so the best way to find me is on Instagram. I see there's a little more readily. So yeah, don't hesitate to reach out if you need any help or have any questions. Okay. Anything else?
All right. Thanks, everybody. Hope you had fun. Watch the class tomorrow if you need to. And we have more classes coming up in January, so check Michael's for those.
And if you make anything, tag me in it. I'd love to see, like on Instagram. I'd love to see what you make. So, okay. All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.